Lisa McCracken with Holleran. You are registered and participating in the 6th webinar of part of our Social Accountability webinar series, and the title of this is The Role of the Board in Organizational Social Accountability. So we appreciate everyone being on board this afternoon, and no pun intended, and we recognize that a number of you have been listening to our various webinars over recent months, and we appreciate you participating in this one as well. The focus of this one will be specifically related to the board's involvement and role in social accountability, their oversight. As is the case with all of our webinars, we do tape these and archive them. So if you have colleagues or others that would be interested in looking at the PowerPoint slides or listening to the audio, they certainly have access to that via our website. And all of the previous webinars are on there as well. So thank you for being a part of today's session. We have an hour slotted for today's PowerPoint for me to go through the slides, to talk about some different ideas to all of you. As is the case with all of our webinars, we very much encourage dialogue back and forth. You do have the opportunity to post questions, and if I see a relevant question throughout the webinar and can respond to that throughout, I certainly will do that. If not, at minimum, at the end, I will definitely make sure that I take a look at all of the questions that you post on in that box there and put out to all of us. So everyone is muted, however, from an audio standpoint, just given the number of people, that probably is the best way to function through the webinar. So once again, thanks for being here. And just a quick funny story before we start. It's related to this webinar. My 9-year-old son this morning was asking me, so Mom, what do you have scheduled for your day today? And after I joked a little bit and laughed because it was such a serious question, I said, well, one of the things on my agenda was this webinar, and I said to Brady, is his name, I said, so how's that, what do you think about sitting and just listening to somebody talk for an hour? And he goes, oh, that sounds painful. So I hope it is not a painful webinar, but a very informative one. But my 9-year-old son is glad that he is not participating in this hour-long webinar. But nonetheless, I think it will be fruitful and helpful for all of you. So it will be just me today, and a little bit of background on the presenters that we've had in recent webinars. One of the things that we've really tried to do is have maybe Holleran giving some background and introducing a certain topic, and then some provider examples. And we actually aim to do that a little bit with this one. And just to share with some of you, in talking with some of the different providers, it was interesting just in terms of recognizing a little bit of the sensitivity around the board piece, and maybe some people sharing some of the lessons learned, or if they are not fully evolved in their journey with social accountability and feel like maybe they've encountered some resistance at the board level, just a little bit of feeling a little strange about sharing that, which I understand. And when you get into talking about your board and your governance, and if you have maybe some potential barriers as it relates to social accountability, or maybe if you haven't been able to talk through it with the board or the board chair, that for some that may not be something that they're willing to just put out there publicly, so which we completely understand. So I sort of backed up and thought, okay, you know what, how about then we really spend a lot of time focusing on giving all of you some suggestions of really how to even initiate the conversation. For those of you who are participating who have not really even brought this topic forth to the board, certainly I think that you can walk away from some things today. But even those who have started down this journey with the board and maybe planted the seed already, I'm going to toss out some different things for you to think about. And like I always say, some of this can be a little overwhelming to think of all of this at once. The reality is this can take a few years to evolve fully as an organization, and so that have that paradigm shift. But if there's something that I throw out as an example, or what some other boards have done, you think, oh my gosh, we're probably light years away from that. It's okay, but just sort of plant that seed a little bit and think about how you can potentially get there down the road. So again, it will just be with me, and we will certainly go through. And at this point, I just want to talk a little bit about what the objectives are. That's me. I want all of you to walk away with an understanding of what the board's role is in social accountability. The one thing to think about with this is actually, if all of you are planning to initiate this discussion with the board, using some of these talking points and maybe even some of these PowerPoint slides that we have here and on our toolkit, which I'll reference in a little bit. But think about even forwarding some of this to your board members. We've actually had different trustees participate in some of our webinars just to get their pulse and fully understand how they can be engaged and involved in social accountability. So in terms of just the basics, we want you to walk away with the understanding of the board's role. To also get some tips and guidance to initiate that board discussion and to give the appropriate education to these individuals. I think education is a really big key to this, because I think often the boards get really focused maybe internally with what's happening within the organization, and then need to be pulled back and think, okay, where is our place in the big picture of all of this, meaning sort of the industry, the community at large. And then to just talk about some short-term, long-term possibilities for board engagement, how to get them involved, how to think about integrating them into the oversight. And again, there's always that balance, however, of the governance versus the operational aspects. By no means am I suggesting that they step into operationalizing perhaps the social accountability and being the worker bee of these things, but yet a lot of the ultimate responsibility is on them as it relates to mission and the tax-exempt issues, which we'll talk about. And I think the other thing that comes to mind too is, as we go through this, is thinking about, okay, do I have the appropriate board composition even to embrace something like this? I mean, I've had some conversations with different providers where they say, oh gosh, my board, they don't even get this. They think this is, a bunch of fluff, and they're just not even receptive. And, it's not to say, oh, go and just create your entire board composition or recruit just for people that are going to be receptive to social accountability, because that's obviously one piece of the governance pie. However, it definitely has its tentacles in a lot of different things. So you can think about the type of individual or individuals who could execute a responsibility like this, like social accountability. So, probably as we talk through this, some of you are thinking about some maybe different board members who sit around your table. So I thought this was a fun little cartoon to put out there, and I'll read it for you. So it says, last week many of us had a tight schedule, so our meeting was very rushed and short. Ms. Jones, please read the seconds of our last meeting. So the point is, I know it can be a challenge to get anything on a board agenda, and you think, oh my gosh, how are we going to fit this on? And it's a scramble to try to cram in everything in maybe the 2-hour board meeting that we have. And just last week I was having a conversation with a provider and was asked this actually during the session I had at a conference, and they said, how do you find time for this? There's so many other things, and yes, we need to make sure they're approving this and looking at the financials and this and that, and everybody's so busy, and I don't know that there's a perfect answer to that. Does it need to start off with being a part of every single board meeting? That's probably going from nothing to that, maybe a little unrealistic, but is it something that you integrate into if you do an annual retreat? You might get 15 minutes the first time on the agenda, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but how can you ensure that this is a board priority and that it's not something that's just tossed aside as one more thing that the board needs to have on their radar? So talk about some tools and resources and methods of communicating that. And I know many of you probably sit on some boards yourself, and you know how it is. People are willing to give their time, but yet they're always sort of eager to maybe finish up with the board meeting and go home for the day or for the weekend. So it is a balance, no doubt. This is a bar graph from a study that Holleran did, and I have another one coming up in a few slides as well. Some of you participated in this. This was a study that Holleran did, and we published it in 2010 in partnership with Leading Age. And we call it the CCRC Social Accountability Study. Our target was CCRCs primarily, and for this first study, it was limited to CCRCs because largely a number of the local tax-exempt issues tend to come up with the CCRCs. However, it's important to note that social accountability is not limited to just CCRC providers, and obviously has relevance for housing, for home community-based services, and many different skilled nursing facilities. So, but the specific statistics on on this chart reflect the CCRC respondents. So there was a question, and again, this was subjective, but agree or disagree, the Board of Trustees discusses the organizational social accountability plan, and how often? So is it on a regular basis? And specifically, this was worded with the goals. You can see here that about 50% are saying they agree to some extent with that. You've got a bunch of fence sitters, but then certainly a number of individuals are saying disagree and strongly disagree. And the number of comments we got with this question was, okay, we don't really even have goals. We maybe have discussed it a little bit, and maybe it's just been around charity care. But so this is a very broad-based question, but the reality is, I wanted to show this in terms of some organizations are discussing this on a very regular basis. And again, above and beyond charity care, it's what are our goals? Hey, are we tracking that? What's our dashboard look like? Or what's our scorecard look like for our social accountability? The other thing, too, I will reiterate, and I know that this is a known for most of you, is that some organizations are using terms other than social accountability, community benefit, community engagement, and seems to have a different connotation for every organization. But all of those are generally used interchangeably. The hospitals on the tax-exempt side generally use community benefit, but social accountability has largely been what's adopted and embraced in senior living. So I thought that was an interesting statistic to share, and again, something that you could use as a talking point for your board if it's something that's not discussed. So why should boards even care? So why should this be another thing that they add to their list? The reality is social accountability is clearly at the heart of not-for-profit governance. And I always repeat this grassroots definition of a tax-exempt organization. At the roots of it, what you are doing is you as a provider are providing a service that if you did not provide otherwise, the government would have to step in and do it, okay? So you're providing that for your local community. You get, likely waivers for local property taxes, obviously tax-exempt financing, things of that nature. So that's really at the root of what tax-exempt organizations are about. And the reality is, and some of you on the line may have been a part of this in the past, because there's many examples if you spend time Googling senior living and tax-exempt challenges. If a tax-exempt challenge comes up or arises, no doubt it's going to be on the board's shoulders to be a part of that. So it's not like they are uninvolved in this. And generally when it comes up is if there's some approval needed for some expansion, a new building, a new community, a new wing, you need permits for something, and then it comes up in front of some of the local elected officials, and it's one of those, okay, they're tax exempt, and let's think about that. So the board very much needs to be aware of that. And, above and beyond this defending the tax-exempt status, really feel like it is smart business, and it's the right way to run an organization. And no doubt with the direction that healthcare reform is taking us, just future of healthcare initiatives, regardless of how healthcare reform ends up being packaged or not packaged, there's increased focus on partnerships, collaborative work. All of you know the transitions in care piece is so significant right now. And this is where the social accountability and the healthcare reform and all those things really start to collide, because the key part of social accountability is having those partnerships and being in tune to what community needs are. And if you are not being the best steward and partner in the community around transitioning those that you care for in and out of hospitals or in and out of, different other support agencies or home health or whatever it may be, then, that is something that you need to be aware of as the board. So social accountability should be a part of the mission extension. So, what does your mission look like? Is it just that we will take care of people who come in our front door and within our bricks and mortar? I think it's thinking really hard about this. And the social accountability discussions often calls a stronger look at the mission. And is it to take care of frail seniors or underserved older adults? And that may really beg for more attention outside your bricks and mortar. Social accountability should be a part of strategic planning. So how are you strategically determining your future services, methods of delivery, methods of support by paying attention to what really the needs are of seniors in your community, or it might even be children if you have a mission that spans the age continuum as well. And then budgeting. Clearly the board is part of budgeting. Now, I'm going to move to the next slide here. This is another question from the social accountability study that we did, and this is sort of a 3-in-1, but these were 3 separate questions. So, is there a specific reference to social accountability in strategic plan, budget, mission statement? So, the strategic plan, the majority of people that answered this said yes. Now, keep in mind, we certainly had a number of people who didn't answer this, but you know, how is it specifically integrated into that? The budget. Now, here's where conversation comes up and organizations often say, well, we track and we know how much maybe we lose, you know, in terms of uncompensated care, the charity care we give, or we track if we give free meeting space to the local Boy Scouts every Monday night and give them cookies and milk, you know, things like that. But we don't necessarily have a line item. I would encourage you to think about that. I know different groups who do social accountability audits from like not just purely an accounting side. I know that this happens a lot in the hospital world with tax-exempt organizations, with hospitals where, you know, sort of one of the things that's part of 101 audits is they look and see is there a line item. And I got to tell you, for some reason there ever is a challenge, having a line item, a budget in there is something that would certainly put you in a favorable position. And then a mission statement. So does the mission statement inherently talk about your place in the community, being an engaged partner and provider and someone who takes care of, again, seniors and caregivers and whoever it may be? So there are some organizations I know who, however, actually have a second, it may not be a full mission statement, but it might be more of like a purpose statement around community benefit, social accountability, community engagement. So that might be something to think about too. So if you were doing, let's say, you happen to do an annual social accountability report, or you're planning to, you know, you might have a standard purpose statement or tagline or mission statement on there. So again, just ask yourself, how do we rate according to this? Is our board, you know, recognizing social accountability and strategic planning, budgeting, and the mission statement piece? So initiating the conversation. So where do you even begin? And I have to tell you that I'd love to hear stories to the contrary for senior living, but I think for the most part, really how boards or organizations are really becoming aware of social accountability is through maybe senior management, executive leadership, then going to the board and saying, hey, you know, let's be in tune to this, as opposed to the board or the board chair coming to an ED or CEO and saying, hey, you know, let's focus on this. It's usually, you know, the other way around. So, you know, it's on all of you, and I know we have many people on the webinar too who, you know, you might be the director of marketing who's in charge of this. You might be in charge of philanthropy or mission development. You might be legal compliance. Again, we continue to see wide variation in the positions and titles who are in charge of this. So, you know, it might be on you to approach the CEO or the executive director and say, hey, I really think that we need to think about this with the board. So education is just key. They don't know what they don't know. So it's really just connecting them to the purpose. So, yeah, I think a logical first step would be to approach the board chair and say, hey, you know, let's talk about how we can maybe get this on the agenda, educate that individual. That way you've got a champion on the board, particularly if you anticipate that this is going to just completely turn things upside down. And for some of you that may sound silly, but I know some organizations, some senior living organizations have said, you know, we've thrown this out there and the board's just like looking at us like we've got 3 eyes. And this, I'm going to talk about timing a little bit, but this can be a very significant paradigm shift for a board. You know, particularly if you're a board who maybe is very operational. You know, we still have, you know, hear stories of boards who are approving invoices. And yes, get yourself up off the chair, but I think for a board, it's setting a certain culture. And so you may need to be doing some groundwork before you know, fully bring this to the table. Probably going to require multiple presentations. So It might just be, getting their big toe stuck in the water, introducing them to the topic, maybe among a number of other different things, and then do some follow-up. So what I would probably think about, think twice about is saying, okay, we're going to go into this and we're going to say, okay, here's what it is. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put together this whole committee. There's this is involved. We need this much money, and this is all going to happen. Because it could be a flood of things and be a little much for them all at once. So just think about the logical way to break this down for them. I think case studies can be really, really helpful, and taking a look at different articles. One of the things in a couple slides, I have some different samples and things for you to take a look at. But the reality is there's a lot that you can find out there in terms of just some real-life examples. And maybe you even have a peer in the area, or maybe somebody within your state who has gone through some challenges with maybe local tax-exempt issues. And, you think them coming and sharing their story would be powerful. I would definitely think about that. The other thing I would encourage you to educate yourself on, just because there are many parallels, and I don't think that we can 100% predict where it's going to go, but there's a number of folks that say, hey, where the not-for-profit hospitals are right now is what's coming down the pike for senior living, not-for-profit senior living providers too. So, if you do not have a strong relationship with maybe one of your area not-for-profit hospitals, talk to them. I guarantee you that they've got someone in charge of the community benefit activities right now. They have to. With the Affordable Care Act and healthcare reform, they have a significant amount of increased pressure and requirements on them from the government, from the federal government. There have been some states where there have been really hotly contested court issues. For example, Illinois. If you are a provider listening from Illinois, you likely know what's happening with the tax-exempt hospitals in that state. So, if you happen to be in a state that's a really hot state for the not-for-profit hospitals, you're likely going to have to up your game as well. So, again, I think sharing the story of the tax-exempt hospitals, we don't want to be in that position in senior living where we are being told what we need to do, when we need to do it, how we need to report on it. They are having to do some very extensive reporting of their community benefit activities every year for the IRS. And if they don't do it right, and if they're not doing a robust community needs assessment and responding, they get a fine, upwards of $50,000 a year. So, and again, sharing examples of peers in senior living. The other thing to know, and I've got an article that I'm going to refer you to in a little bit, but this is only heightened by the economic downturn. And I hear this often, just even in some circles with elected officials locally, and even from providers, that the reality is at the local level, the town council, the county commissioner, whatever it may be, they are looking for additional revenue. And, if they're going to have to be waiving property taxes because a not-for-profit wants to come in or a not-for-profit is already there, they may be thinking twice about that. The reality is the rules are a little different today. So you just need to be making sure that you've got some really strong partnerships, I think, with elected officials. And it's not just being their friends, but I think it's having them understand what you're contributing back to the local community. And the reality is it's got to be above and beyond employment. That does not fly anymore. So it's not just like a board can say, oh, well, look how many people we employ. We're the biggest employer in our rural county. That's not enough anymore. The elected officials need to really see, okay, wow, let's quantify this. And if they weren't here, it would actually cost us more. So some things to definitely think about. I referenced going for outside speakers. And this might be after you plant the seed a little bit and do some upfront work with the board, but let's say there's an annual retreat. I think having them hear it from someone other than yourself can be pretty powerful. And I actually had a discussion last week with a CEO of a CCRC, and he said, I've been talking about this for a period of time. Initially, it was under Quality First, and social accountability is not a new thing that's been out there. And he said, I really think that sometimes when there's somebody else from the outside coming in, it's just a more powerful message because they say, wow, okay, others are talking about this, and it's not just our executive director or CEO talking about it. I think the other thing to acceptance and having a board embrace this is acknowledging that, you know what, there's a lot of things that an organization is probably already doing pretty well around this. I don't think it's starting from scratch. Most organizations are not in a position where they're not doing anything. You just need a system and a framework around it. And one of the things that we are seeing through our toolkit, which has an assessment piece in there, a self-assessment, is that, you know, organizations generally are a little stronger on the commitment and also the telling the story, but yet they're missing 3 of the 5 key components. So essentially, there's people are doing stuff, but there's no systematic discipline to it or framework. It's just going in a bunch of different directions. Maybe you're tracking it, maybe you're not. But, you know, I think as opposed to getting up to the board and saying, we don't do this and we're doing this wrong and all the things that are wrong, also start with the list of things that you're doing well, too. New board member orientation. I think this is a really simple, I say simple thing to do, but in terms of something that's very actionable. You know, I know that I sit on a board. I know, again, many of you do, and there's always a new board member orientation, whether it's a packet, whether it's a special meeting, whether you have to go away to a retreat, you know, for a day or something. You know, I would absolutely encourage this to be a part of it. So, you know, why does your organization feel like you need to be an engaged part of the community? And, you know, even before board member orientation, board member recruitment. I think this can be a key part of questioning in terms of, you know, evaluating a potential fit for a board member and having them answer how they feel the organization should be engaged in the community. And I think that's going to be a really strategic way of developing a really strong board for all of you. So board member orientation. I can tell you we had some other organizations on in previous webinars, and I remember one specifically, La Posada in Arizona. They actually have it in a resident handbook and new resident orientation about their social accountability. So any new resident that moves into their community, retirement community, knows that it's very much a part of the culture there, that they see themselves as sort of one with the greater community and that they're not functioning in a silo. So I think if organizations can be doing it for residents and staff, then clearly it needs to be a part of board member orientation also. So when I said give examples, again, so a board doesn't think that you're up there just talking a bunch of fluff. And I got to tell you, all you need to do is Google stuff. Just Google. You can Google tax-exempt challenges. You can Google retirement committees. You're going to find tons of stuff for hospitals. And, you know, there's a couple up here that, you know, maybe some of us know, and these are really good organizations and just happen to get, you know, caught up in some different things. And there's some real lessons learned. So, again, if you think that it's just the hospitals and not any long-term care providers, you need to educate yourself a little bit more about that. And, you know, in the upper right-hand corner, study targets exemptions. And specifically for hospitals and retirement, they call them retirement homes. We know that's not always the vernacular, but, and then I referenced Illinois and the amazing disappearing property tax exemption. So some states are definitely more hotbeds for these challenges than others. So learn from your peers, you know, how can you do some work in advance. So there's one article I'm going to encourage you to read, and don't, hopefully it will not instill too much fear, but I'm just making a point, and I actually had a conversation with a staff person from Leading Age earlier today, the National Association, around what is happening is that, you know, in recent years, in years past, a lot of the questioning really has come from, you know, elected officials, you know, let's say federally, congressmen, you know, certainly there have been things at the state level with attorney generals, obviously local levels with town councils and, you know, zoning officers and things like that. But there's definitely an increase in the last few years of just general sort of advocacy groups. And one of them found a very interesting article in the Institute for Wisconsin's Future. So I think we've got some folks on board from Wisconsin, so you may know this one. But they have a whole website, so you can go and check it out. Again, just educate yourself. But they specifically put out a document, a report for local governments of how to turn property tax exemptions into revenue for them. And it's called Too Many Loopholes, from the Institute for Wisconsin's Future. So the reality is there are just other grassroots associations and groups that are popping up. And sometimes all it takes is a handful of, 2 or 3 individuals locally who, don't like the fact that, oh, this, large senior living provider is tax exempt, and go out and hand out flyers. I've seen that happen too. So, this specific document, I pulled out an excerpt here, and this is word for word. Some retirement communities are sited on valuable land and charge residents very high monthly fees, but pay no property taxes at all. If tax that should be at the same rate as elderly living in their homes, it would generate at least $15 million each year. This was sent out to the press, all the different, industry journals and so forth. So, again, just keep in mind, I think that particularly groups like this, it's going to increase for sure. If the public in general is not understanding the difference between a tax-exempt organization and a profit organization, you need to be doing some more homework around that. There's a whole cabinet with leading age around the not-for-profit difference, and part of it is very much that communication and promotions piece. So I think having a board read some of these things and understand, again, the reality out there, I think it's that could be very valuable for them. The power of numbers. I know that there are some organizations who their repeated message to certainly executive management, but also to the boards, if they've got local boards, let's say it's a multi-site organization, the national board, and say, okay, here's the dollar amount. If we lost our tax-exempt status, boom, here's what it would be. And, I know that some of the tax-exempt challenges, they've resulted in some different things. There's some groups where maybe a certain level of care is taxed, and another one is not. And I think that can depend on maybe some of the state stuff, some of the local things that result. Others where maybe they just lose the local property tax battle, but yet they're still a 501c3. So again, there's dollars and cents at different levels here, but it's just having the numbers. So the reality is if let's say the board's saying, oh gosh, we're really struggling, I'm thinking, to budget $5,000 for this, or even, if you're a small organization, budgeting $1,500 can be a lot. Think about what the price would be otherwise if you had a challenge or an issue around that. Again, I think it's education, not panicking people. I think it's just being level-headed about this, but there needs to be clarity around the importance of social accountability. I've heard some people say, oh, that's just a feel-good activity. I've got a slide coming up on just overcoming any resistance that you may experience, but the power of numbers are important. Now, one thing to point out, and this came up in a previous webinar around telling your story and annual reports and things of that nature. So there are some groups, and potentially some of you on the call today, where their goal is to give back to the community equal to what they pay or get exemptions for, let's say, in local property taxes or different taxes. And one of the providers said they used to publish that every year and say, okay, we give this much back to the community because that equals what our exemptions are because of being not-for-profit, what we don't have to pay. And they actually got an opposite response where the community was like, no, wait, that's how much we could be getting from you in property taxes if you were to pay. So it sort of backfired. So I'm not saying, I'm just saying think about that a little bit. But for the board, they need to be fully in the know with all of that. So again, what would be the quantifiable amount if for some reason you were to lose its not-for-profit status? And that doesn't include all the legal fees for the battle. Some of these go on for several years. And yeah, it would have been cheaper just to maybe do some things to respond to some community needs. So overcoming resistance, and these are quotes that these are not just ones that are made up. These are ones specifically that have been shared with us. Specifically, number one, and we know that this is a sensitive one right now, this sounds like this is just going to cost us more money. The board says, okay, so really this just is a money thing, right? And the reality is partly that. It's not all that. Again, I think if this is done right, the return is far greater than any investment. Again, it's smart business, secondary gain around public image, you know, PR, just relationships that are formed. Some of those are hard to quantify, but I think that they far outweigh any money shelled out. So there might be some financial investment up front, but the reality is there are certain things that you can do that don't cost a whole lot. Again, fostering some of these partnerships and holding a health fair or a community day, you know, you can get people to donate stuff, and maybe you host it and have the site, and so you can be creative, and it's not all about the money. Second, we were given our tax-exempt status for a reason. We're fine. So bottom line, and I heard this out of the mouth of a CEO who said, we need to not forget that. And if we didn't deserve it, we would never have gotten 501c3. So done deal. Well, the reality is the rules have changed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There are higher expectations for tax-exempt organizations now, particularly larger ones that are profitable, you know, to really prove it even more than what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. So I don't think we have anything to be concerned about. We take care for elders. We do good work. We take care of, you know, aging people. So, you know, it's not just all about the good work. Yes, I mean, you may be taking care of seniors who are in their last stages of life, but again, if you are perceived as this big community where rich people go to retire, and they think about, you know, the dollars and cents of that, often it's not enough. So again, it may be responding to needs outside of the bricks and mortar. So so those are some common things that I think can come up. And again, generally resistance comes from a lack of understanding. So education is really the key. So I want to talk a little bit about some responsibilities of the board and get you thinking about how you can integrate them. Again, this is not going to all happen overnight, and these examples are given from actual organizations that do some of these things. So when we say responsibilities across all levels of social accountability, this is the model that we have put together around the social accountability framework. It's the pyramid where obviously commitment is at the base, and discovery, program development, storytelling, the evaluation piece. I'm not going to go through all of that now in great detail, but the reality is the board has responsibilities at each of these levels, most importantly the commitment piece. What I'm finding is a lot of organizations are jumping into maybe doing a little bit of program development, but just doing things, and then they're telling the story, but yet they don't really fully have commitment, maybe of the board or maybe even of their senior management. I recently had a CEO say to me, yeah, you know, we've talked about this at the board, but I got to tell you, I feel like I really need, you know, some team building around my executive team and them understanding social accountability. So the reality is, if you don't have the board member commitment, you're not going to be able to succeed at anything else. So you've got to really have that be key. And in terms of timing, make sure that they're in the loop. So what's the role of the board? Obviously, there needs to be awareness of what social accountability is. You know, I think it's keep it in mind and reminding board members, although I would think this would be part of the standard sort of roles and responsibilities or in bylaws if you have them for the board. Hopefully you do, but they have a greater role for fostering relationships in the community. So they have a responsibility with this as well. And so it's not just through the organization's staff of going out and fostering these partnerships and responding to community needs. Your board members are your external stewards and representatives as well. You know, obviously, you know, the board has a responsibility for sharing the organizational plan and, you know, being a part of the evolving the social accountability. So there is that responsibility around what their expectations are. And I think it's really important for the board to be very clear about what their expectations are. Again, they don't need to be the worker bees and the doers with all of this, but the board needs to have a discussion and some ownership of, okay, here's our place. You know, our expectations are, you know, we will ensure that the mission, you know, is intact and any social accountability efforts support that. You know, things like a pilot agreement. For some states, this doesn't apply as much, but pilot meaning payment in lieu of taxes. I have in parentheses there a really, really good document that's out there now, and I referenced PAMPA there, Leading Age PA now, but if you Google PAMPA Tax Exemption Policy Statement, it will pop up. I had a hard time finding it just under the Leading Age PA because it was created when they were PAMPA, But if you are exploring a pilot agreement or just what is that about, how do we go about it, that's a really good document for you to take a look at. So again, the State Association here in Pennsylvania, where we are, created that, and it's a really good document. That's where a lot of organizations get nailed. So they did not upfront have a pilot agreement, let's say with a local school district or whoever they paid the local taxes to, and that's when it comes up as a challenge. If only you would have just discussed some of these things in advance. Again, is there a goal for contributions? Some boards say, hey, okay, so our goal every year is to give back to the community, okay, and again, it might be dollars or it might be dollar equivalent in terms of, again, room rental or free shuttle service or free parking for the local Alzheimer's walk, whatever it may be, to equal what we would have to pay in, let's say, local taxes or taxes for this or that. So, but that needs to come from the board. That shouldn't be something that's just arbitrarily decided on, whatever that goal is. That needs to be approved, and there needs to be some accountability, quite frankly, at the board level. And also, what is the criteria for social accountability programming? So whatever programming is put together, whatever initiatives are done, is there criteria? So it might be simple things such as, okay, must relate to our mission. So if the mission is to take care of seniors, and you are going off and donating money for rehabbing, drug users in the community, gosh, that might be a little bit of a disconnect. That's an extreme example, but it's responding to community needs around criteria of mission, again, core values. It might be something where they say, okay, it's in this geographic area, or if you were a large national organization, it might have a bigger scope. So what are some criteria? Our Social Accountability Toolkit has some sample criteria in there. There's about 6 or 7 that are often incorporated into different plans. These are the things that I would see on the responsibility and the shoulders of the board. I'm going to talk a little bit about a Social Accountability Oversight Committee, and I've got a subsequent slide coming up about just a little bit of a job description, although I hate to use the term job. Let's say roles and responsibilities. But this may not be a thing that happens overnight, but, and I find that even some of the more sophisticated senior living providers who have been doing social accountability for a period of time don't necessarily have a committee. I think it's a really smart move. Again, in Holleran Social Accountability Toolkit, we have a whole section on why that is and like the pros and cons of a committee, but just a discussion about, is this a subcommittee of the board, or is it a committee outside of the board but with a board member or 2 liaison? And I've seen it done both ways. Sometimes it might be integrated into, if there's a subcommittee around mission and outreach, social accountability might be thrown into that. Again, I don't know that I feel strongly one way or the other. Quite frankly, I sort of like the idea of having it sit outside the board, but absolutely must have 1 or 2 board members or even more that are our liaisons and part of that, where then you get maybe other representatives from the outside community. You might have a resident sit on the committee. You might have a staff person, some of the executive management. It's just really, really smart to have that group oversight of what your commitment is, ensuring that culture, are goals being met? If not, why not? Again, it doesn't need to be the worker bee, but it's the oversight group. And I'll give an example, and this is an example from a tax-exempt hospital organization. It's actually where we are here in Lancaster. Lancaster General Health is a very, pretty much the poster child for community benefits. And one of their prerequisites for their board chair for the health system is that whoever is the board chair must have previously served as the chair of the Community Benefit Missions and Community Benefit Subcommittee. So you cannot even qualify as being the hospital board chair until you have been the chair of that previous committee. And that just emphasizes how important that is to them. So again, I know that that's a hospital organization, and there's a lot more of community benefit that they need to focus on right now than what senior living providers do. But that's just an example of how some organizations are seriously taking the board structure as it relates to the accountability and community engagement piece. So what are reporting mechanisms for accountability to the board? So again, it may be keeping them in the loop, and then maybe it's once a year. Again, obviously in the annual report, then they see the statistics of, okay, boom, here's how much we've given back to the community, here's how much we've, eaten in terms of charity costs. There might be, you might have a balanced scorecard system that is shared with the board. It might be a dashboard that they look at quarterly. Again, I know boards meet at very different intervals and are structured all very differently, but this cannot be a once-and-done thing. I think it needs to turn into part of the governance and oversight of the organization. Again, this is not just a feel-good thing. It's a smart way to run an organization, and the reality is this is absolutely where things are going. So if you're not doing it now, potentially in the future you may have to do it this way. So I think, organizing it that way where there's that regular oversight and reporting is a really smart way to do it. This committee, you can go into our toolkit and click on this document that you see here on the right, and it pulls up as a separate PDF, so you can download and print this off and distribute it to your board members or even just within your management team. But it gives a couple different bullet points for roles and responsibilities. It's ensuring that commitment and culture, alignment of plans with the mission and values. So let's say there's a total disconnect, and the board has this strategic plan that they approved and went through this whole planning process with the CEO and the CFO and COO, and then there's this whole separate social accountability program that you're managing or your marketing manager put together, and there's a complete disconnect between the two. That's really not a healthy way to have that synergy within your organization. So need to have that alignment of the plans and mission and values, goals and objectives. I think that is the biggest, mistake that groups make. They're not clearly articulating what their goals and objectives are for the program. Why are we doing this? You cannot be the end-all, be-all. I don't think thinking that more is always better. It's being strategic about this, and it impacts funding decisions. So budgeting, are you going to have a line item or not around this? That requires the board's final adoption and approval. So I would encourage you to take a deeper look and to use that document and use that for educational purposes. I referenced timing. Be realistic with how long this might take. It might take several board interactions. Again, keep in mind that this can be a paradigm shift and a culture change for a board. So, don't put undue pressure on yourself, and just, do the best that you can and make some measurable improvements over time. There's a series of resources that I would point you towards. Again, the Holleran Social Accountability Toolkit just has a lot of things. We have a whole section around the board and initiating that conversation and engaging them. The Leading Age website obviously has a whole social accountability section, and I know a lot of the state associations and your state association maybe have some resources. Catholic Health Association, American Hospital Association. Specifically for boards, I'm going to mention a few different documents and magazines and journals that I think are helpful. Again, there's a couple. One of them is Trustees magazine, and again, it's slanted a little more toward healthcare, but I would suffice to say probably 75% of their articles are very relevant for senior living providers and boards. The other one is the American Hospital Association has what's called Great Boards, and there's just so much talking around deepening board engagement, around community involvement and community engagement. So there's just a lot of crossover, and I referenced the hospital world because I don't know that there's necessarily tons of just governance and board things for senior living providers around social accountability. So take from those what you can and learn from them. And I said many other resources on the web. All you need to do is Google some different things, and you may need to use some things outside of social accountability, maybe community engagement and boards, community benefit, and you're going to find a lot of resources. So do your homework before you send the message to the board. So that is my overview. I have a couple other things that I want to mention just in terms of, a few other things for you to consider and plan about moving forward. But I want to respond to any questions. So if you have some of them, certainly you can enter them in the pane on your slide. But we do have questions. One person asked, will the slides from this webinar be available after today? Yes, we will. What we do is a couple things. We do email all the participants these slides, so you will have them for yourself. We will also, it's generally within would say a couple days, sometimes maybe it's a week, but generally within a couple days we will post this to the Holleran website as well, and just at holleranconsult.com, and you can go in there and you can see all the previous archived ones as well. So, and again, the audio is there, so feel free to forward that to others. So, so other questions, again, we don't have the ability to do audio, but don't hesitate to throw or post any questions in writing there. So give it another second. Have a whole lot coming through, which is fine. So let me talk a little bit, again, I'll come back, and before we finally close out, I just want to advance to another slide just around the next webinar. This was the final webinar, just in terms of, we initially set out to do a 6-part series, and that was us sitting down, we sat down with leading aides and said, okay, from this study, what's everything we learned, and what are some of the hot topics to provide some education and support around. So the board one was the one that was the 6th one. So we are wrapping this out, wrapping this up, but we have one additional one scheduled, and it's really just to help people navigate through our toolkit, which is a free toolkit. It's not something you have to pay for, so it is a resource for all of you. And there's tons of information. The reality is you could sit for hours and hours and hours and hours and go through this, but we wanted to have a toolkit, or I'm sorry, a webinar, just to help people navigate through that and understand how to use it. There is a PDF you can download, but the web-based is very interactive. It's got pop-ups, and you can download all kinds of documents, PowerPoints, PDFs, tip sheets, blank worksheets, and planning documents. There's an online assessment that gives you an instant report of the profile of your organization. So we want you to be able to understand all of those tools that are available for you. So if you are not registered already, there is that webinar on July 12th. So we have sent out the link. We'll send that out again, just some reminders for everybody. And again, we have that for you. Do have another question. Can you talk a little bit about how to help the board recognize the difference between social accountability and marketing efforts? That's a really key differentiation, and it's tricky because often the marketing director or head of marketing is in charge of social accountability, which that makes sense to a large degree as well, particularly with the telling the story, but you need to constantly ask yourself, why are we doing this? So if you are hosting a luncheon, okay, and it is all the people who are on your wait list, and you're inviting them, and you know that maybe some of them might be depositors. You're going to come and you're going to feed them lunch, and you're going to have a speaker too. Bottom line, that's being done for marketing and to boost your occupancy. Now, a reverse of that, where a purely social accountability effort would be, you know what? We know our community has had a lot of issues with XYZ issue, and we are hosting a forum where anybody can come in the community. So it's put in the paper, and it's a guest speaker, and they're an expert on this or that, and they have a book, and they're going to sign a book, anybody who comes. And it's held the evening of this. And you have people that come, and maybe you have some light refreshments, some cookies there, some punch, and things like that. That's social accountability. Now, does it also have a secondary benefit where it boosts your image? Absolutely. Does it get people to your community where they say, gosh, this could be a great place for Mom. I've never been in here before. Absolutely. So it's just, what is the primary driver for this? And is it about being a good steward in your community? Is it about somehow improving knowledge, access, the health and wellness of your community? That's social accountability and community benefit. The other most common question we get asked, so the marketing one is one that is clearly a point of confusion sometimes, but also all around what counts in terms of, the volunteering, if residents volunteer and the staff volunteer. Just have to be very careful around, what is your role in that? So if you just have a really involved, resident who has been involved with the local United Way for many years and, gives back and does this great thing at the local schools, you can't take credit for that just because they live in your community. So there's no doubt there's some gray areas in there, but if you are donating money and helping them build a program and there's a specific role and contribution from the community, then clearly those aspects you can count. But the marketing piece is one that you really need to think of what is our genuine reasons for doing this and the objective. So good question. At this point, I don't see other questions. One of the things that we will encourage you to do as well is we do ask you to provide some feedback to us in terms of an evaluation following this webinar. So for all of you, that will be a pop-up, and just ask you to rate how effective this was for you. And if there's other things that you would like some support on, we're always willing to hear this. Like I said, it's the final as part of our webinar series outside of the Toolkit Navigation webinar, but if there are needs that arise, we'll continue to certainly offer these. And I know that we're working closely with Leading Age, too, as they have their ears to the ground of where some needs are. So if there are no further questions, I appreciate your time. Good luck in reaching out to your board and getting their support. And if they are already committed and behind this, let's take them to the next level. And share with us your stories. We're always looking for provider examples and hearing about your successes as well. So thank you so much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the summer day. Take care. Bye-bye.